The day my world shattered began like any other. The autumn sun streamed through our bedroom windows, casting golden light across the Italian marble floors of the mansion I'd worked my entire adult life to afford. I never imagined that by sunset, I'd discover the man I married, the man who arrived at our relationship with nothing but charm and promises, would be calling me a nobody to the woman he was secretly seeing behind my back. But life has a way of revealing people's true colors, especially when legal documents expose exactly who owns what. My name is Rebecca Winters, and this is the story of how I discovered my worth wasn't defined by my husband's betrayal, but by the empire I'd built with my own two hands. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I met Daniel Crawford at an industry conference in Chicago 5 years ago. I was there representing my tech consulting firm, Horizon Solutions, which I'd built from scratch into a respected mid-sized company with offices in 3 states. Daniel was working as a sales representative for a software company, his confidence immediately apparent in his perfectly tailored suit and the ease with which he commanded attention in every conversation. "Rebecca Winters," he'd said, reading my name badge at the networking reception. "Your panel on cybersecurity infrastructure was impressive." I was surprised he'd attended. Most sales reps spent the conference hours schmoozing potential clients at the hotel bar, rather than sitting through technical presentations. "You actually sat through that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I accepted the glass of wine he offered. "Front row," he replied with a smile that made the room feel suddenly warmer. "I like to understand the problems my clients are trying to solve." There was something magnetic about Daniel, an earnestness beneath the polished exterior that drew me in. Despite my usual caution around charismatic men, by the end of the evening, we'd exchanged numbers, and by the time I returned to Boston, we were talking daily. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend visits became weeks together, and within 6 months, Daniel had relocated to Boston, leaving his modest sales position for what he called bigger opportunities in my city. I helped him secure interviews with my connections, and he landed a business development role at a promising startup. "You're my lucky charm," he'd say, kissing me as we celebrated his new job with champagne on the terrace of my Beacon Hill townhouse. I should have recognized the pattern then, how he seamlessly integrated himself into my world, how his ambitions seemed to conveniently align with the opportunities in my orbit. But love has a way of blinding even the most clear-eyed among us. When Daniel proposed a year later during a vacation to Santorini, I said yes without hesitation. We married in a lavish ceremony at the Boston Public Library, surrounded by 250 guests, most of them my long-standing friends, clients, and business associates. Daniel's side was notably smaller, just a handful of college friends and an elderly aunt who'd raised him after his parents died. "You're my family now," he'd whispered during our first dance, and my heart had swelled with love and protection for this man who seemed so grateful for the life we were building together. After the wedding, we moved into my Beacon Hill home, and for the next 3 years, life seemed perfect. Horizon Solutions continued to thrive under my leadership, expanding to a 4th office in Seattle. Daniel's career progressed steadily, though never at the meteoric pace of my own. I never minded that I was the primary breadwinner. I'd worked hard for my success and was proud of what I'd built. When an opportunity arose to purchase a historic mansion in Wellesley, I jumped at it. The 8,000 square foot estate on 3 acres with a pool, tennis court, and separate guest house represented everything I'd worked for. Daniel initially seemed hesitant about the purchase. "It's a lot of house, Becca," he'd said, walking through the empty rooms during our second viewing. "It's an investment," I countered. "And we deserve it." What I didn't say was that the mansion represented security to me, a tangible manifestation of my success that no one could take away. Growing up with a single mother who'd struggled to Make rent each month had instilled in me a deep need for financial independence and security. My lawyer, Miranda Chen, had advised me to purchase the property in my name alone, given that my funds were being used for the down payment and my income would cover the mortgage. I dismissed her concerns at the time, not wanting to create any division in my marriage. Daniel and I are a team, I'd insisted. What's mine is his. Miranda had looked at me with a mixture of professional respect and personal concern. Just because you share your life doesn't mean you need to commingle all your assets, she'd advised. Let me at least draw up a post-nuptial agreement to protect Horizon Solutions. After some persuasion, I'd agreed to the post-nup, which specified that my company and the Wellesley property would remain mine in the event of a divorce. Daniel had signed without hesitation, joking that he was just along for the ride with a successful wife like me. We moved into the mansion last spring, and I spent months personally overseeing the renovations and interior design. Daniel seemed less interested in the process, often working late or traveling for business while I selected finishes and furniture. I attributed his distance to the natural ebb and flow of a relationship, to the pressures of his job, to anything but the truth that was slowly taking shape behind my back. The revelation came on an ordinary Tuesday in October. I'd left a board meeting early with a pounding migraine, canceling my remaining appointments to head home for some quiet recovery time. Daniel wasn't expecting me. He thought I'd be in meetings until late evening, followed by a client dinners. I pulled into our circular driveway. I noticed an unfamiliar black Mercedes parked near the side entrance. Probably one of the contractors finalizing details on the wine cellar renovation, I thought, though something about the luxury vehicle seemed out of place among the usual work trucks. I entered through the kitchen, dropping my keys on the marble island. The house was quiet, but I could hear faint music coming from the direction of our home office. As I moved through the main floor, I caught the sound of laughter, Daniel's distinctive chuckle followed by a woman's softer response. My migraine momentarily forgotten, I paused outside the office door, which was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see Daniel seated on the leather sofa, a glass of what appeared to be my rare Japanese whiskey in his hand. Across from him sat a woman I recognized as Elise Bennett, a junior associate at Daniel's company, young, ambitious, and undeniably beautiful, with her cascade of auburn hair and impeccable style. I was about to push the door open and announce my presence when Elise's words froze me in place. "I still can't believe you live here," she was saying, gesturing around the office with its custom built-ins and view of the gardens. "It's like something out of a magazine." Daniel's response changed everything. "Don't be too impressed," he said, with a dismissive wave. "None of this is really mine. It's all Rebecca's, bought and paid for with her family company money." "But you're her husband," Elise countered. "Doesn't that make it yours too?" Daniel laughed, a sound I'd once found warm but now seemed hollow and cruel. "Technically, no. My brilliant wife had me sign a postnup. If we split, I walk away with basically what I came in with, which wasn't much." "That doesn't seem fair," Elise murmured, moving to sit beside him on the sofa. "It's fine," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a tone I'd never heard before. Calculated, cold. "Rebecca's successful, sure, but she's nobody outside her little tech bubble. No real connections, no family name. Just a workaholic with a big house and no one to share it with." "You share it with her," Elise pointed out, though she didn't sound particularly convinced. "For now," Daniel replied, setting down his glass and taking her hand. "Until I figure out my next move. This was always meant to be temporary, Elise. A stepping stone." As they leaned toward each other, I stumbled backward, knocking into the hallway table. The vase of fresh flowers I'd arranged that morning crashed to the floor, shattering like my illusions about my marriage. The office door flew open, and Daniel stood there, his expression transitioning from shock to guilt to a practiced concern in the span of seconds. "Rebecca, you're home early." He stepped into the hallway, partially blocking my view of Elise, who was hurriedly straightening her clothing. "Are you okay? What happened?" I stared at him, this stranger I'd married, trying to reconcile the loving husband I thought I knew with the calculating man I'd just overheard. "I think you should ask your guest to leave," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. "Becca, this isn't what it looks like," Daniel began, reaching for my arm. "Elise and I were just discussing a project. Stop." I stepped away from his touch. "I heard everything, Daniel. About how this house isn't really yours. About how I'm a nobody. About how I'm just a stepping stone for whatever grand plan you've concocted." The color drained from his face. Behind him, Elise appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "I should go," she said, slipping past us without making eye contact. "Yes, you should," I agreed, not taking my eyes off Daniel. "And take the Japanese whiskey with you. It's actually Scottish, by the way. Another detail my husband apparently never bothered to learn." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. After Elise left, Daniel launched into damage control mode, insisting he'd been exaggerating to impress her, that nothing physical had happened, that he loved me and our life together. But the carefully constructed image I'd held of our marriage had already crumbled, revealing the hollow foundation beneath. "I want you out of my house by morning," I said, turning away from his increasingly desperate explanations. "My lawyers will be in touch." I walked upstairs to our master suite, locked the door behind me, and finally allowed the tears to come. Not for the loss of Daniel. I realized with startling clarity that I was mourning the death of an illusion rather than a genuine love, but for my own blindness. How had I, a woman who prided herself on making shrewd business decisions, failed so completely to see the truth of my own marriage? As I sat by the window overlooking the immaculate gardens I'd commissioned, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire, I made a promise to myself. This would be a setback, not an ending. Daniel Crawford might have seen me as a nobody, but he was about to discover exactly who owned not just the mansion, but every aspect of the life he'd grown so comfortable living. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking to the sound of the master bathroom shower running. For a moment, I forgot everything that had happened, reaching instinctively for Daniel's side of the bed before reality crashed back. He hadn't left as I'd demanded. I sat up, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. Daniel emerged from the bathroom in a cloud of steam, a towel wrapped around his waist. His expression brightened when he saw I was awake. "Morning, Becca," he said cautiously, as if testing the waters. "I made coffee." I stared at him, momentarily speechless at his audacity. "I told you to leave." "I know you're upset," he said, his tone reasonable, placating. "But we need to talk about this like adults. 15 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Something in his confidence made me curious. What possible explanation could he offer that would justify what I'd heard? I nodded curtly, reaching for my robe. 15 minutes. Downstairs. In the kitchen, Daniel had indeed made coffee, using the expensive Italian beans I'd brought back from our anniversary trip to Rome last year. He'd set the table with fresh fruit and croissants from the bakery down the street. The domestic scene might have been touching if I didn't now recognize it as calculated performance. "I was an idiot yesterday," Daniel began as I took a seat across from him. "What you overheard, it wasn't real, Becca. I was playing a part." "A part?" I repeated, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee mug to stop them from shaking. Not from sadness, but from a growing anger. "Elise has been pursuing me for months," he explained, leaning forward earnestly. "I've been trying to let her down, gently because we work together. Yesterday she showed up unannounced, saying she needed to discuss a project. Once she was here, her intentions became clear. So you decided to insult me and our marriage as a rejection technique? I asked incredulously. That's your explanation? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I was trying to make myself seem unavailable without directly rejecting her. Men who are unhappily married are more attractive to some women. They see them as a challenge. I thought if I played into that but made it clear there was no future for us because of financial complications, she'd back off. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his explanation. And the part where you called me a nobody? The part where you said I was just a stepping stone? Were those strategic elements of your rejection plan too? I was playing a character, Becca, he insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away before he could touch me. I needed to seem like a certain type of man to make the story convincing. None of that reflects how I truly feel about you. As he spoke, I studied his face, the earnest eyes, the concerned furrow of his brow, the slight tremble in his lower lip. I'd always thought Daniel was transparent to me, that I could read his every emotion. Now I wondered if I'd ever known him at all, or if every expression had been as carefully calculated as this morning's coffee and croissants. You expect me to believe that you were running some elaborate long con on this woman? All while drinking my whiskey and entertaining her in our home when you thought I wouldn't be here. It sounds bad when you put it that way, Daniel admitted. But yes, essentially, I made a poor judgment call. I should have shut it down differently or reported her to HR. I'm sorry, Becca. More sorry than you can imagine. I took a sip of my coffee, buying time to process. His story wasn't entirely implausible. Office politics could be complicated, and unwanted advances from colleagues were unfortunately common. But something still felt off. If what you're saying is true, I said, slowly, then you won't mind if I call Elise to confirm your version of events. Daniel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. I don't think that's a good idea. She's embarrassed and probably worried about her job. Involving her further would only complicate things. Things are already complicated, Daniel, I replied. You've just offered an explanation that paints you as the victim of persistent unwanted attention and her as the aggressor. I think I'd like to hear her perspective. This is between us, Rebecca, he said, his tone hardening slightly. Bringing other people into our marriage problems isn't going to help. I smiled without humor. Funny, you already brought her into our home. I'm just suggesting a conversation. Daniel pushed back from the table, his breakfast untouched. I've apologized. I've explained. I don't know what else you want from me. The truth would be nice, I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed dramatically. Fine. You want the truth? I made a mistake. I was flattered by her attention. We've been flirting for a few weeks. Nothing physical happened, I swear. But yesterday crossed a line. It was stupid and wrong, and I regret it completely. This new version, while still portraying him in the most favorable possible light, at least had the ring of partial truth. But it still didn't address what he'd said about me, about our marriage. And the things you said? About me being a nobody? About this being temporary? Daniel's expression softened, his eyes becoming liquid with what appeared to be genuine remorse. I was showing off, saying what I thought would impress her. Men say stupid things when they're trying to seem important to beautiful women. None of it was true, Becca. You're everything to me. If he'd stopped there, if he'd simply owned his mistake and offered a genuine apology, perhaps things might have ended differently. But Daniel, even the salesman, couldn't resist pushing for the close. We can get past this, he continued, reaching for my hand again. This time I let him take it, curious to see where he was going. We've built a beautiful life together. I made one mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment, but it doesn't erase all the good in our marriage. I love you, Rebecca. I love our home, our life together. Please don't throw it all away over one stupid afternoon. Our home. Our life together. The words echoed in my mind, reminding me of what I'd heard him say to Elise, how none of this was really his, how it was all bought and paid for by me. There was the disconnect, the sliver of truth that revealed everything else as carefully constructed fiction. I gently extracted my hand from his. I need some time to think, I said, standing up from the table. I have meetings all day that I can't reschedule. We'll talk more tonight. Relief washed over Daniel's face. He thought he'd bought himself time, perhaps even begun to repair the damage. Of course, take all the time you need. I'll be here when you get home. Maybe I'll make dinner. That new pasta recipe you like? I nodded non-committally and headed upstairs to shower and dress for the day. As I stood under the hot water, my thoughts cleared. I didn't need time to think. I already knew what I needed to do. What I needed was time to act. My first call was to Miranda Chen, my lawyer. I reached her as she was arriving at her office. Rebecca, she answered, her tone warm but professional. This is an unexpected surprise. I need to meet with you today, I said without preamble. It's urgent. There must have been something in my voice that conveyed the seriousness of the situation because she immediately responded, I'll move some things around. Can you be here at noon? I'll be there, I confirmed, feeling the first sense of solid ground beneath my feet since yesterday's discovery. My next call was to my executive assistant, Jasmine. I need you to clear my afternoon schedule after my lunch break, I instructed. And please contact Anderson Security. I want to schedule a change of all the security systems and locks at my residence, preferably for this afternoon. Is everything okay, Rebecca? Jasmine asked, concern evident in her voice. It will be, I assured her, more confident than I felt. Also, can you pull together a file with any and all communications between Horizon Solutions and Daniel's company over the past year? Contracts, emails, meeting notes, everything. Of course, Jasmine replied, her tone shifting from concerned to efficient. I'll have it ready before your lunch break. My final call was the hardest, but perhaps the most necessary. I dialed the office of Martin Reynolds, Daniel's boss and the CEO of the startup where he worked. Martin, it's Rebecca Winters, I said when his assistant connected us. I need to speak with you privately about a sensitive matter involving Daniel Crawford. Are you available for coffee this morning? Martin, who I'd known professionally for years and who had always treated me with cordial respect, agreed immediately. Of course, Rebecca. The cafe across from your office in 30 minutes? As I finished getting dressed, selecting a tailored navy suit that always made me feel powerful, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken or defeated. She was clear-eyed and resolute. Daniel had called me a nobody, but he was about to discover exactly who I was and what I was capable of when betrayed. I left without saying goodbye to Daniel, who was on his phone in the study when I passed by. He looked up, giving me a hopeful smile and an exaggerated thumbs up, as if we were teammates working through a minor disagreement rather than spouses navigating a fundamental breach of trust. Let him think he's won, I thought as I walked to my car. Let him believe I'm considering forgiveness. By the time I returned home tonight, the game would have changed entirely, and Daniel Crawford would learn that underestimating Rebecca Winters was the biggest mistake of his life. The cafe across from Horizon Solutions' downtown office was bustling with morning commuters when I arrived. Martin Reynolds was already seated in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. He stood as I approached, his typically jovial expression replaced with concern. Rebecca, he said, extending his hand. You sounded troubled on the phone. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. I wouldn't have reached out if it wasn't important. Martin nodded, pushing one of the coffee cups toward me. I've known you long enough to understand that. What's going on with Daniel? I took a deep breath, considering my approach. Martin wasn't just Daniel's boss. He was also a respected figure in Boston's business community and someone whose opinion carried weight. How I handled this conversation would have ripple effects beyond my marriage. I need to understand something first, I began carefully. Has Daniel ever mentioned any difficulties in our marriage to you? Martin shifted uncomfortably, confirming my suspicion before he even spoke. He's made some comments over the past few months. Nothing specific, just hints that things weren't ideal at home. I see, I said, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over me. And Elise Bennett? Has he mentioned her? Martin's eyebrows shot up. Elise? No, not specifically, though. He hesitated, clearly weighing professional discretion against whatever he knew. Please, Martin, I need the truth. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. There have been rumors, office gossip. I didn't put much stock in them since Daniel always presented himself as a devoted husband. But yesterday, my HR director approached me about a potential inappropriate relationship between them. We were planning to investigate. The relationship is real, I confirmed, keeping my voice steady. I discovered them together in my home yesterday afternoon. Martin's expression darkened. Rebecca, I'm truly sorry. That's completely unacceptable, both personally and professionally. There's more, I continued. I overheard Daniel telling Elise that our marriage was temporary, that I was a nobody, and that he was using me as a stepping stone. Martin recoiled slightly, genuine shock crossing his features. That doesn't sound like the Daniel Crawford I know. Apparently neither of us knew him as well as we thought, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee to steady myself. But I'm not here to discuss my marital problems, Martin. I'm here because I'm concerned about potential business implications. What kind of implications? He asked, instantly alert. Daniel has had access to sensitive information about Horizon Solutions through our marriage. Given what I've learned about his character, I need to ensure he hasn't used that information inappropriately in his role at your company. Martin's expression grew grave. You think he might have leveraged confidential information? I don't know, I admitted. But the timing of certain business decisions between our companies has always seemed fortuitous for your startup. Now, I'm wondering if that was a coincidence or something more calculated. The success of Martin's company, Next Tech Solutions, had been partially built on securing Horizon as an early client. We'd implemented their security software across all our offices shortly after Daniel joined their team, a decision I'd championed based on what I believed was the strength of their product. Martin was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. I'll need to conduct an internal review, he finally said. If there's been any impropriety, I want to know about it. I'd appreciate that, I replied. And there's one more thing. I'm planning to file for divorce, effective immediately. Given the circumstances, I'd prefer if Daniel wasn't in a position to access any further information about Horizon Solutions during this process. Martin nodded slowly. I understand. I'll place him on administrative leave pending our investigation. It's the standard protocol for situations involving potential ethics violations. Thank you, I said, relief washing over me. One potential vulnerability addressed. As we parted outside the cafe, Martin placed a hand on my shoulder. Rebecca, for what it's worth, anyone who calls you a nobody is revealing far more about themselves than about you. You're one of the most respected executives in this city. His words were kind, but they couldn't fully salve the wound of Daniel's betrayal. Still, as I walked the short distance to Horizon's offices, I felt more centered, more in control. The familiar weight of professional problems, ones I knew how to solve, was oddly comforting compared to the turmoil of my personal life. Jasmine was waiting when I arrived, a thick folder in her hands. The information you requested, she said, following me into my office. And Anderson Security confirmed they can be at your residence at 3 o'clock to change the locks and security system. Perfect, I replied, setting my bag down and turning to face her. Jasmine, I'm going to tell you something in confidence because it may impact work in the coming weeks. Daniel and I are separating. It's not amicable. To her credit, Jasmine's expression registered only a brief flash of surprise before returning to professional composure. She'd been my right hand for 5 years, and her discretion was impeccable. I understand, she said simply. What do you need from me? For now, just your usual excellent work and discretion. If Daniel calls the office for any reason, direct him to my cell phone. Don't provide any information about my schedule or whereabouts. Jasmine nodded. Of course, and Rebecca? I'm sorry. I managed a small smile. Thank you. Now, let's review this file before my meeting with Miranda. The next 2 hours flew by as I meticulously examined every interaction between Horizon Solutions and Nextech. Most seemed legitimate, standard business dealings between two compatible companies. But there were a few instances that raised red flags. A contract signed shortly after Daniel and I had taken a weekend getaway where I'd left my laptop open in our hotel room. A pricing structure that seemed unusually favorable to Nextech given the market at the time. Meetings scheduled with key Horizon developers that coincided with Daniel's work-from-home days. Nothing definitively incriminating, but enough patterns to warrant further investigation. I made detailed notes to share with Miranda and tucked them into my bag before heading to her office. Miranda Chen's law firm occupied the top floor of a sleek high-rise in the financial district. Her corner office offered sweeping views of Boston Harbor, though today I barely noticed the scenery. She greeted me with a warm but concerned embrace. Our professional relationship had evolved into friendship over the years of working together. Sit, she instructed, gesturing to the comfortable seating area rather than her imposing desk. Tell me everything. I did, starting with discovering Daniel and Elise in our home and ending with my morning meeting with Martin Reynolds. Miranda listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. The post-nuptial agreement we put in place should protect your primary assets, she said when I finished. The house, your company shares, your investment accounts, all of those are clearly designated as separate property. What about the joint accounts? I asked. Daniel and I maintained one household account to which we both contributed, though my contributions were significantly larger. Those would typically be split equally, Miranda explained. But given the circumstances, especially if we can demonstrate that Daniel entered the marriage with ulterior motives, we might be able to argue for a different distribution. How do we prove his motives? Miranda tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. The conversation you overheard is compelling, but it's hearsay. We need documentation. Communications between him and Elise that predate yesterday. Evidence of him disparaging you or discussing financial motivations. Anything in writing would be extremely valuable. I hadn't considered searching for physical evidence. The thought of going through Daniel's private communications felt invasive, even after what he'd done. But Miranda was right. If I wanted to protect myself fully, I needed more than my word against his. There's also the potential business angel, Miranda continued. If Daniel used your marriage to gain competitive advantages for his company, that could constitute corporate espionage or breach of fiduciary duty, depending on the specifics. The legal implications were spinning out far beyond what I'd initially imagined. What had begun as a personal betrayal was rapidly evolving into something more complex, with potential professional and legal ramifications for both Daniel and me. What do you recommend as first steps? I asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. Miranda's expression softened slightly. First, protect yourself physically and emotionally. Changing the locks is good. Consider staying with a friend for a few days if you're uncomfortable being alone with him in the house. Next, secure your digital presence. Change all passwords, check your accounts for unusual activity, review your credit reports. I nodded, making mental notes. Then, she continued, we file for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences. Massachusetts is a no-fault state, so the infidelity won't impact the legal proceedings directly, but it may influence negotiations. We'll request temporary orders regarding the house and finances. How quickly can we move? I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning, Miranda assured me. The more pressing question is, how do you want to handle this with Daniel? Do you want him served formally, or would you prefer to tell him yourself? That you're filing? I hadn't considered this aspect. The thought of watching Daniel be served divorce papers held a certain appeal after his betrayal, but I also recognized that escalating the conflict unnecessarily might complicate what was already becoming a messy situation. I'll tell him myself, I decided. Tonight, after the security system is changed, I want him to understand that this isn't a negotiation or a temporary reaction. It's over. Miranda nodded approvingly. In that case, I'll messenger the papers to your office tomorrow morning for your signature, and we can file them immediately after. As our meeting concluded, Miranda walked me to the elevator, her hand supportive on my arm. Rebecca, I know this is professionally complicated, but try not to lose sight of the personal aspect. Take care of yourself. Betrayal like this can be traumatic. I'm fine, I assured her, straightening my shoulders. I'm angry, but I'm clear-headed. Good, Miranda replied, though her expression remained concerned. Call me anytime, day or night. I mean that. As the elevator doors closed, I leaned against the wall, briefly allowing my composed facade to slip. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. But I couldn't rest yet. There was still so much to do before confronting Daniel tonight. For now, I needed to be Rebecca Winters, CEO of Horizon Solutions, confident, competent, in control. The wounded wife would have to wait her turn. Back at Horizon Solutions, I buried myself in work, grateful for the distraction of quarterly budget reviews and client proposals. The familiar rhythm of business decisions provided a respite from the chaos of my personal life. Around 2 o'clock, Jasmine knocked on my office door with a message that made my stomach clench. Daniel's called 3 times in the past hour, she reported. The last time he said it was urgent. Did he say what it was about? I asked, my mind racing through possibilities. Just that he needed to speak with you immediately. Jasmine hesitated. He sounded agitated. I glanced at my watch. The security company would be at the house in an hour to change the locks and codes. Has Daniel somehow discovered my plans? Thank you, Jasmine. I'll handle it. After she left, I stared at my phone, weighing my options. Ignoring Daniel might escalate the situation, but engaging with him before I was ready could derail my carefully constructed plans. Finally, I decided on a brief text message, in meetings all afternoon. What's urgent? His response came immediately. We need to talk. Martin put me on administrative leave. What did you say to him? So that was it. Martin had moved quickly, more quickly than I'd anticipated. I considered how to respond. There was little point in denying my involvement, but I wasn't ready for a full confrontation yet. We can discuss tonight. I'll be home around 6. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before his reply finally came through. Fine. But this is completely unfair. I deserve a chance to explain. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say via text, and I needed to finish my workday before dealing with what promised to be an explosive evening. I turned my attention back to my computer, forcing myself to focus on the spreadsheet before me rather than the imploding remains of my marriage. At precisely 2:55 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the home security system. Front door accessed. The app showed Daniel leaving the house, his expression tight with anger as he strode to his car. Perfect timing. He would be gone when the security company arrived. I called Anderson Security immediately. Daniel Crawford has just left the premises. Can your team head over now? We'll redirect the technicians right away, Ms. Winters. They should arrive within 15 minutes. Relief washed over me. At least one element of my plan was proceeding smoothly. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. I was running on autopilot, my mind split between professional obligations and the personal crisis looming ahead. By 5:30, I received confirmation from Anderson Security that all locks had been changed, security codes updated, and the system reconfigured to send alerts to my phone only. Additionally, they'd installed a small camera at the front door, my request, that would allow me to monitor any attempts to enter the property. As I packed up to leave the office, Jasmine appeared in my doorway. Rebecca, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite persistent. Who is it? I asked, already dreading the answer. Elise Bennett. I froze. Of all the complications I'd anticipated today, a confrontation with Daniel's mistress wasn't one of them. My first instinct was to refuse to see her, but curiosity won out. Send her in, I decided, squaring my shoulders and sitting back down behind my desk. Better to have this conversation here, on my territory, than risk an unexpected encounter elsewhere. Elise entered hesitantly, looking markedly different from the confident woman I'd glimpsed in my home office yesterday. Her expensive clothing and perfect makeup couldn't disguise the nervous energy radiating from her as she stood awkwardly just inside the door. Ms. Winters, she began, her voice surprisingly steady despite her apparent nervousness. Thank you. For seeing me? Ms. Bennett, I replied coolly. What can I do for you? She twisted her hands together. I wanted to apologize. What happened yesterday? It wasn't what you think. Please, I said, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Enlighten me about what I think. Elise flinched slightly at my tone but pressed on. Daniel told me you two were separated. He said you were divorcing, that it was just a matter of time before it was official. This wasn't entirely surprising. It was the oldest excuse in the book, but hearing it stated so baldly still stung. How long? I asked, my voice deceptively calm. Excuse me? How long has this been going on between you and my husband? Elise swallowed visibly. 3 months. We met at the company retreat in May. He approached me at the welcome dinner, said he'd noticed me around the office. It was flattering. Daniel can be very charming. Yes, I agreed dryly. I'm familiar with his charm. He told me his marriage was over in all but name, she continued, that you were both just going through the motions, staying together for appearances and financial reasons. I laughed without humor. And you believed that? The classic line from A Married Man. He was convincing, she said defensively. He showed me separate bedrooms in your house, said you hadn't been intimate in over a year, that you were both seeing other people discreetly. Each revelation was another cut, but I maintained my composure. And yesterday? What was that about? Elise looked genuinely uncomfortable now. He invited me over. Said you were away at meetings until late and he wanted to show me around the house. The house he claimed you were planning to sell as part of the divorce settlement. And calling me nobody? Describing me as a stepping stone? Was that part of his divorce story too? I was surprised by those comments, Elise admitted, looking down at her hands. It didn't align with how he'd described your relationship before. He'd always spoken of you with respect and said the separation was amicable. Yesterday was different. He seemed, I don't know, bitter? Like he was trying to convince himself as much as me that there was nothing left between you. I studied her carefully, trying to determine if her story was genuine or another manipulation. Why are you telling me this now? Because I was fired today, she said bluntly. I was called into HR this morning and terminated for violating the company's relationship policy. Daniel wasn't even there. He didn't warn me, didn't try to defend, Me. Just threw me under the bus to save himself. Ah, there it was. The real motivation. Not remorse over participating in the destruction of a marriage, but anger at being betrayed by her lover. That's unfortunate, I said, not bothering to hide my lack of sympathy. But I'm not sure what it has to do with me. I'm not the first, Elise said, her eyes now meeting mine directly. There have been others before me, at least 2 that I know of, junior staff members who suddenly transferred to different departments or left the company altogether. Daniel has a pattern. This was new information, and potentially valuable. Do you have proof of these other relationships? Not directly, she admitted. But Sarah in accounting might. She's friends with one of the women, and there are rumors about inappropriate messages sent through the company system. I made a mental note to have Jasmine contact this Sarah person discreetly. If Daniel had left a digital trail of his indiscretions, it could be useful for the divorce proceedings. Is there anything else? I asked, glancing pointedly at my watch. Elise hesitated, then reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. You should see these, she said, sliding it across the desk toward me. I picked it up cautiously. On the screen was a text conversation with Daniel from 2 months ago. Elise, when can I see you again? These stolen moments aren't enough. Daniel, soon. R is focused entirely on the Seattle expansion. She barely notices I exist. Ideal arrangement, really. Her money, my freedom. Elise, don't you feel bad about deceiving her? Daniel, she deceives herself, thinks her success makes her untouchable. She doesn't realize how easy it would be to take it all away. Elise, what do you mean? Daniel, let's just say I've been planning for the future. Smart man always has an exit. Strategy with assets secured. She'll learn that lesson too late. I felt my blood run cold. The messages confirmed my worst fears. Daniel's betrayal went beyond the personal into something potentially more sinister. There are more, Elise said, quietly. He talked about financial information he had access to, mentioned something about offshore accounts. I didn't understand all of it, but it seemed calculated. I scrolled through several more exchanges, each more damning than the last. Daniel hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been systematically planning something that sounded alarmingly like financial fraud. Why show me these? I asked, looking up from the phone. Why not take them directly to the police if you suspected something illegal? Elise reclaimed her phone, her expression hardening. Because I wanted you to see who he really is, and because I'm not stupid. If I go to the authorities, I could be implicated as an accessory. But if you take action based on information I provided, that positions me as a whistleblower, rather than an accomplice. Her candor was almost refreshing after Daniel's manipulations. What do you want from me, Ms. Bennett? A clean slate, she replied immediately. I want a reference that doesn't mention why I left Nextech. I want to be able to find another job without this scandal following me. And I want Daniel to face consequences for his actions, all of them. That's quite a list of demands from someone who was sleeping with my husband, I observed, keeping my voice neutral. I'm not proud of my choices, Elise said, standing straighter. But I didn't know the full truth. You can hate me if you want. You have every right to. But we've both been deceived by the same man. The difference is, you have the power to do something about it. As much as I resented her role in this situation, I couldn't deny the logic of her argument. Her information could be invaluable in protecting myself from whatever scheme Daniel had been planning. Send me screenshots of those messages, I said finally. And the contact information for anyone else who might have relevant information about Daniel's activities. I'll consider your request for a reference depending on how valuable your information proves to be. Relief washed over Elise's face. Thank you. I'll send everything tonight. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Ms. Bennett? For what it's worth, you're not the first woman Daniel Crawford has manipulated. and you wouldn't have been the last. Don't waste too much energy blaming yourself." She nodded once, a ghost of a smile touching her lips before she disappeared through the door. I sat back in my chair, processing this unexpected development. What had begun as a straightforward case of infidelity was evolving into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Daniel's texts suggested he'd been planning some kind of financial maneuver against me, possibly for months or even years. The security system notification chimed on my phone. Daniel Crawford attempted entry at the front door. Access denied. It seemed the confrontation I'd been preparing for all day was about to begin, ready or not. I watched through the security app as Daniel tried his key again, then knocked forcefully on the front door. When there was no response, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. His next move was predictable. He pulled out his phone and called me. I let it ring through to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. "Why are the locks changed? This is ridiculous, Rebecca. Let me in." I typed a measured response. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. We'll talk then." The camera captured his reaction, a mix of anger and disbelief as he read my message. He paced on the front steps, alternating between checking his watch and staring at his phone. Finally, he stormed back to his car, slamming the door with enough force that the security camera's microphone picked up the sound. I took my time driving home, using the minutes to gather my thoughts and prepare for the confrontation ahead. The revelations from Elise had changed the landscape significantly. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. There were hints of something more calculated and potentially criminal in Daniel's behavior. I needed to be careful, strategic, and, above all, calm. When I arrived, Daniel's car was parked in the driveway, and he was sitting on the front steps, his posture rigid with anger. He stood as I approached, his handsome features arranged in an expression of wounded indignation that I now recognized as carefully constructed. "What the hell is going on, Rebecca?" he demanded as I walked past him to unlock the door with my new key. "You changed the locks? You got me put on administrative leave? Are you trying to destroy my life?" I entered the house without responding, setting my bag down on the entryway table with deliberate calm. Only when I'd removed my coat and turned to face him did I finally speak. "You destroyed our marriage, Daniel. Any consequences you're facing are the direct result of your own actions." "This is about Elise, isn't it?" he said, following me into the kitchen where I poured myself a glass of water, more to have something to do with my hands than out of thirst. "I told you that was a mistake, one stupid mistake that meant nothing." 3 months isn't a mistake, I replied evenly. It's a calculated decision, a pattern of behavior. Daniel's expression faltered for just a moment before he regained control. "What are you talking about?" "Elise told me everything. How long you've been seeing each other. The lies you told her about our marriage. The things you said about me when you thought I wouldn't find out." "She's lying," he said immediately. "She's obviously trying to cause problems because I ended things with her after you found out." "Really? That's your defense? That she fabricated 3 months of text messages and detailed accounts of your meetings?" I shook my head. "Try again, Daniel. Maybe something more creative this time." He shifted tactics, his expression softening, as he reached for my hand across the kitchen island. "Becca, listen to me. I made a serious mistake. I got caught up in something that I should have shut down immediately. But it was just physical. It never meant anything. You're the one I love, the one I built a life with." I pulled my hand away. "A life you described as temporary. A stepping stone." "I told you I was just saying what I thought would impress her," he insisted. "None of that was real." "Which part wasn't real, Daniel? The affair? The disparaging comments? Or the plans to take it all away from me?" His face went completely still. "What?" "Your text to Elise," I clarified. "The ones where you talked about your exit strategy and the assets you'd secured." The ones that mentioned offshore accounts and financial information you shouldn't have had access to. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel Crawford seemed genuinely at a loss for words. The calculated charm evaporated, replaced by something closer to panic as he realized how much I knew. Those were private conversations, he finally managed. Elise had no right to show them to you. That's your response. Not that they were misinterpreted or taken out of context, but that I shouldn't have seen them. I laughed without humor. Thank you for confirming their authenticity. Daniel's expression hardened. You don't understand what you've read. You're taking things out of context. Then explain it to me, I challenged. What exactly did you mean? By planning to take it all away? What assets have you secured? It was just talk, he said dismissively. Meaningless bravado to impress a younger woman. Like calling me a nobody? Was that meaningless too? Yes, he exclaimed, seeming relieved that I'd provided him with an opening. Exactly like that. I was playing a role, saying what I thought would appeal to her. None of it reflected my true feelings or intentions. I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of the man I thought I'd married. All I saw was a stranger wearing a familiar face, frantically trying to maintain a crumbling facade. I'm filing for divorce, I said quietly. The papers will be ready tomorrow. His expression cycled rapidly through shock, anger, and finally, calculation. You're overreacting. We should at least try counseling before making such a drastic decision. No, Daniel. It's over. Because of one mistake? After everything we've built together? We haven't built anything together, I corrected him. I built it. The company, the house, the life you've been enjoying. Those are the results of my work, my investments, my decisions. You've been along for the ride, nothing more. His face darkened. That's not fair. I've contributed to this marriage. Have you? In what way exactly? You've never paid more than a token amount toward our living expenses. Your name isn't on the deed to this house. The furniture, the art, even the car you drive, all purchased with my income. I supported your career, he argued. I was there for you emotionally, helped you network, entertained your clients. You mean you enjoyed the benefits of my success? While positioning yourself to exploit it, I countered. That's not support, Daniel. That's parasitism. The calculated mask slipped completely then, revealing a flash of genuine rage that confirmed I'd struck a nerve. You smug, condescending bitch, he spat. You think you're so superior with your fancy company and your big house? You'd be nothing, without your daddy's money to start you off. I blinked, momentarily stunned by the venom in his voice and the wild inaccuracy of his claim. My father was a high school teacher who died when I was in college, leaving me with student loans and not much else. I built Horizon Solutions from nothing, with no family money or connections. You know this. It's literally in my company biography. Daniel faltered, clearly having forgotten this basic fact about my life, or perhaps he'd never bothered to learn it in the first place. Whatever, he said dismissively. The point is, you don't get to throw me away like yesterday's trash. I have rights. You have the right to a fair division of our joint assets, which amount to precisely one checking account with roughly $30,000 in it. Everything else is protected by the post-nuptial agreement you signed. That agreement was signed under duress, he countered, a calculating gleam returning to his eye. I could contest it. On what grounds? You had independent legal counsel. There were witnesses to your signing. The terms were eminently fair given our respective financial situations. I felt a surge of gratitude for Miranda's insistence on doing everything by the book. But please, feel free to try. I'm sure the courts will be very interested in your explanation of why you should be entitled to assets you've been disparaging in private messages while planning some kind of financial scheme against me. Daniel's confidence visibly wavered. You're twisting everything. Those messages don't prove anything. Perhaps not on their own, I agreed. But, combined with the internal investigation Martin Reynolds is conducting at Nextech, and the review I've initiated of all interactions between our companies, they paint a concerning picture. He paled slightly. What investigation? Martin? Didn't mention it? How strange, I said, affecting surprise. He seemed quite interested in examining whether you'd used our marriage to gain competitive advantages or access to proprietary information. That's absurd, Daniel protested, but his voice lacked conviction. There's nothing to find. Then you have nothing to worry about, I replied smoothly. Now, I'd like you to pack whatever personal belongings you need for the next few days and leave. You can arrange with my assistant to collect the rest of your things later this week while I'm at work. You're throwing me out of my own home? He demanded, incredulously replacing his earlier calculation. My home, I corrected firmly. Purchased with my funds, maintained with my income, and legally established as my separate property in our post-nuptial agreement. You've been a guest here, Daniel. A guest who has overstayed his welcome. He stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed, he finally said. No, I replied honestly. I haven't changed at all. I've simply stopped allowing you to define who I am. Something shifted in his expression then. A grudging respect, perhaps, or at least a recognition that his usual tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. Fine, he said, his voice cold. I'll get my things. But this isn't over, Rebecca. You'll regret treating me this way. I met his gaze steadily. No, Daniel. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner. He held my stare for a beat longer than comfortable, then turned and headed upstairs. I heard drawers opening and closing, the sound of a suitcase being zipped. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Security team is outside if you need them. Just say the word. I smiled faintly at her foresight. Of course she'd anticipated the potential for conflict and arranged protection. Thanks, but I think it's under control, I replied. 15 minutes later, Daniel returned downstairs with a large suitcase and a duffel bag. He'd composed himself, his expression once again carefully neutral. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. Tomorrow, he said, setting his house key on the entryway table with exaggerated politeness. I look forward to it, I replied, equally cordial on the surface. Drive safely. It was a surreal exchange, like strangers completing a business transaction rather than spouses ending a 5-year marriage. But perhaps that's exactly what we were. Strangers who had been playing parts in different plays without realizing it until now. As his car disappeared down the driveway, I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, momentarily overcome by the events of the past 36 hours. The house felt eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the antique clock in the living room. For the first time since discovering Daniel and Elise in my home office, I allowed myself to fully feel the loss, not of the man Daniel had turned out to be, but of the future I'd thought we were building together. The children we might have had, the milestones we would have celebrated, the partnership I'd believed in despite all evidence to the contrary. Tears came then, hot and unexpected, a release of tension rather than genuine grief. I wasn't mourning Daniel. I was mourning my own naivete, my willingness to trust someone who had seen me not as a partner, but as a means to an end. My phone buzzed again. Not Miranda this time, but an email notification. From Elise Bennett, with the subject line, "Everything I promised." Attached were dozens of screenshots of conversations between her and Daniel, plus contact information for 2 other women he'd allegedly been involved with at Nextech. I wiped my eyes and straightened my shoulders. There would be time for processing, emotions later. Right now, I have work to do, evidence to review, strategies to develop, a future to reclaim from the man who had tried to steal it from under me. Daniel had called me a nobody to impress his mistress. Soon he would learn exactly who he'd been dealing with all along, and it would be a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Morning came with a clarity that surprised me. I'd expected to feel drained after the emotional turbulence of the previous day, but instead, I woke with a sense of purpose and focus I hadn't experienced in months, perhaps years. The weight of maintaining a relationship that had been fundamentally dishonest was gone, leaving behind a strange lightness despite the complications ahead. I dressed with particular care, selecting a crimson sheath dress and the pearl earrings my mother had given me when I graduated business school. Looking in the mirror, I saw not the betrayed wife, but the decisive CEO. The woman I'd been before Daniel's deception had temporarily made me doubt myself. My morning ritual felt different in the empty house, simpler, more streamlined, without, accommodating Daniel's preferences and schedule. I was just finishing my coffee when my phone rang with Miranda's number. "Good morning," I answered, checking the time. "You're calling early." "I wanted to catch you before you left for work," she replied, her usual brisk tone tinged with concern. "How did it go last night? Do I need to activate the restraining order? Paperwork?" "No, that won't be necessary," I assured her. Daniel was angry but controlled. He left without a major incident. "Good. I have the divorce petition ready for your signature. I can messenger it to your office this morning as planned, or you can stop by here on your way in." I considered my schedule. "I'll come to you. There are a few things I want to discuss. In person anyway." "Perfect. I'll clear my calendar for you." An hour later, I sat across from Miranda in her office, reviewing the divorce petition. The legal language transformed my marriage into a series of sterile facts and assertions. Date of union, separation date, grounds for dissolution, requests for property division. It was oddly comforting, this reduction of emotional chaos to order paragraphs. "Everything looks in order," I said, signing where indicated. "What happens next?" "We'll file this immediately," Miranda explained, gathering the documents. "Daniel will be formally served, probably tomorrow. Once he's served, he'll have 20 days to respond, typically through his attorney." "And if he contests it?" "Based on our post-nuptial agreement and Massachusetts law, he doesn't have much ground to stand on regarding the major assets. He might try to claim a larger portion of the joint account or argue for alimony, but given the length of the marriage and his earning capacity, those arguments are unlikely to succeed." I nodded, relieved that at least the financial aspects seemed straightforward. "There is one complication we should discuss," Miranda continued, her expression growing more serious. "The information you received from Elise Bennett about potential financial impropriety. If Daniel has been engaged in anything illegal involving your company or personal finances, that could significantly impact the proceedings." I spent half the night reviewing the screenshots she sent, I admitted. "They're concerning but somewhat cryptic. He mentions contingency plans and safeguards that sound suspicious but nothing explicitly incriminating." Miranda tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. "Have you checked your financial accounts? All of them? Including any that Daniel might have access to?" A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I'd reviewed our joint household account before going to bed and found nothing unusual, but I hadn't thought to check everything. "I checked the obvious ones," I said slowly. "But there are investment accounts I don't monitor daily. Retirement. Funds. The company expense account he occasionally uses for client entertainment. I'd recommend doing a comprehensive review as soon as possible," Miranda advised. "And consider freezing any accounts he might still have access to, just as a precaution." "You think he might try to take money?" "I think a man who described your marriage as a stepping stone and talked about having an exit strategy with assets secured might not have the highest ethical standards," Miranda replied dryly. "Better safe than sorry." I nodded, making a mental note to contact my financial advisor and banker immediately. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I recorded our conversation last night." Miranda's eyebrows shot up. "In Massachusetts, that's a two-party consent state, I know." I finished for her. I didn't record it for legal purposes. I wanted a record of what was said in case I needed to remember details later. My memory isn't always reliable under stress. Smart, Miranda acknowledged. Just don't try to use it in court. What did it capture? His admission that the texts with Elise were authentic, for one thing, and his reaction when I mentioned the investigation at Nextech. He looked genuinely alarmed. That could be useful? Informally, even if we can't introduce the recording as evidence. It gives us insight into his state of mind and potential vulnerabilities. Miranda made a note. Speaking of Nextech, have you heard anything more from Martin Reynolds about their internal review? Not yet. I expect it will take a few days at minimum to compile records and conduct interviews. Martin seemed committed to being thorough. Good. If they find evidence of corporate espionage or misuse of confidential information, that could have significant implications beyond your divorce. The gravity of the situation settled over me. What had begun as a personal betrayal was expanding into something that could potentially affect my company, my employees, and my professional reputation. I need to protect Horizon, I said firmly. Not just myself. Absolutely, Miranda agreed. Which means getting ahead of this before Daniel has a chance to create a counter-narrative. Have you spoken with your executive team or board about the situation? I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted to have the divorce filed in process first. That's wise. Now that we're filing today, I'd recommend briefing key stakeholders soon, before rumors start circulating. Corporate divorces can get messy, especially when there are allegations of financial misconduct involved. The phrase corporate divorce struck me as particularly apt. Like business mergers that didn't work out, my marriage to Daniel was being unwound through a process of asset division, legal documents, and strategic communications. I'll schedule a confidential briefing with my executive team this afternoon, I decided. Just the facts they need to know: that Daniel and I are divorcing, that there may be implications for the company given his position at Nextech, and that we're taking all necessary precautions to protect Horizon's interests. Miranda nodded approvingly. Perfect. Direct, professional, and proactive. You might also want to alert your PR team to prepare a statement in case this becomes public knowledge. You think it will? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Boston's business community was surprisingly small and interconnected. News traveled fast, especially scandalous news involving prominent executives. It's a possibility we should prepare for, Miranda replied diplomatically, especially if the Nextech investigation uncovers anything significant. As I left Miranda's office, I felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on my shoulders. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about protecting everything I'd built over the past decade. My company, my reputation, and my future. My phone buzzed with a text as I reached my car. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Winters, this is Sarah Donovan from Nextech Accounting. Elise gave me your number. I have information about Daniel Crawford you might want to see. Can we meet? The second woman coming forward in as many days. I texted back, my office, 1 p.m. Ask for Jasmine at reception. Her response was immediate. I'll be there. Thank you. Back at Horizon Solutions, I sequestered myself in my office with strict instructions to Jasmine not to disturb me, except for emergency calls or my 1 p.m. appointment. For the next 2 hours, I meticulously reviewed every financial account connected to my name. Personal checking and savings, investment portfolios, retirement accounts, real estate holdings, and company expense accounts. Most appeared untouched, but I found 3 concerning discrepancies. First, a series of unusual transfers from our joint household account to an unfamiliar bank account over the past 6 months. Small amounts between $2,000 and $5,000 that wouldn't necessarily trigger attention individually, but totaled nearly $50,000. Second, 2 unauthorized attempts to access my personal investment account that had been flagged by the financial institution's security system but never reported to me. And third, most alarmingly, Several large transactions on the company credit card Daniel occasionally used for client entertainment, charges at high-end hotels and restaurants in New York and Miami on dates when he had claimed to be on business, trips to Chicago and Atlanta. I was documenting these findings when Jasmine buzzed to announce Sarah Donovan's arrival. "Send her in," I instructed, closing the spreadsheet on my computer. Sarah was younger than I expected, mid-20s at most, with a nervous energy that reminded me of Elise, though her style was more subdued. She clutched a folder to her chest. As she entered, her eyes darting around the office as if assessing escape routes. "Ms. Donovan," I greeted her, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for seeing me," she replied, perching on the edge of the seat. "I wasn't sure if you would." "You mentioned having information about Daniel Crawford," I prompted, keeping my tone neutral. "I assume this is related to the internal investigation at Nextech?" Sarah nodded, though she looked surprised. "You know about that? It's supposed to be confidential." "I'm aware that an investigation is taking place," I clarified, "not the details or scope." She hesitated, then placed the folder on my desk and slid it toward me. "I work in accounting. Last week, Daniel asked me to process some unusual expense reports, backdated items from trips he took months ago. When I questioned the delay, he said he'd been too busy to submit them earlier." She paused. "The receipts didn't match our records of where he was supposed to be." I opened the folder to find copies of expense reports and receipts. Hotels in Boca Raton when Daniel should have been in Dallas. Restaurant charges in Manhattan when he'd supposedly been meeting clients in Washington, D.C. These align with some discrepancies I've found in our company credit card statements, I said, looking up from the documents. "Charges for similar locations on the same dates." Sarah's eyes widened. "He was double-dipping, getting reimbursed by both companies for the same trips?" "It appears so," I confirmed, "though I suspect he wasn't on legitimate business for either company during these trips." "There's more," Sarah said, her voice dropping as if someone might overhear despite the closed door. "When the investigation was announced yesterday, I was asked to compile all of Daniel's expense reports for the past year. While I was gathering them, I found something strange." She reached into the folder and pulled out another document, a printout of what appeared to be a wire transfer authorization. This was mistakenly included with his June expenses. "It's a transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands for $75,000, authorized by Daniel but using Martin Reynolds' electronic signature." I studied the document carefully. "You're suggesting Daniel forged Martin's authorization?" "I don't know for certain," Sarah admitted. "But I've processed hundreds of Martin's authorizations, and something about this one didn't look right. The timing was odd, too. Late Friday evening when Martin was at his daughter's wedding in Vermont. I flagged it for the investigation team yesterday." This was potentially explosive information, not just financial impropriety, but possible forgery and embezzlement. If proven, Daniel could face criminal charges, not just termination. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked, studying her carefully. "This seems like something that should be handled internally at Nextech." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "The investigation team is led by Thomas Greenberg. He and Daniel are close friends. They play golf together every weekend. I'm concerned that things might get overlooked." The implication was clear. She didn't trust the internal process to be impartial. "And how do you know Elise Bennett?" "We were in the same new hire cohort 2 years ago. When she heard I was gathering financial records for the investigation, she reached out, told me what happened with you and Daniel." Sarah paused. "I'm sorry about that, by the way. It's horrible what he did to you." Her sympathy seemed genuine, but I remained cautious. "What exactly are you hoping I'll do with this information, Ms. Donovan?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe nothing. But if Daniel has been manipulating financial records and forging authorizations, people should know. It's not right." I considered her carefully. Either Sarah was genuinely concerned about potential financial crimes, or this was an elaborate setup, though to what end, I couldn't immediately see. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," I said finally. "May I keep these copies?" She nodded. "That's why I brought them. Just, please don't mention where you got them. I really need this job." "Your name won't come up," I assured her. "Is there anything else you think I should know about Daniel's activities at Nextech?" Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "Not specifically, but there have always been rumors about him, how quickly he rose through the ranks, the special treatment he received from upper management. People joked that he must have had compromising photos of someone important. Or perhaps, I thought grimly, he'd been trading on his connection to me and Horizon Solutions in ways I was only beginning to discover." After Sarah left, I sat for a long moment contemplating the expanding web of Daniel's apparent deceptions. The man I'd married, the man I'd trusted with my home, my business connections, and my heart, had potentially been engaged in a pattern of behavior that went far beyond personal betrayal into the realm of criminal activity. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Daniel. We need to talk. This divorce filing is a mistake." I stared at the message, a cold anger rising within me. After everything I'd learned, he still thought he could manipulate me into reconsidering. Still believed his charm and persuasion could overcome the mounting evidence of his duplicity. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up my office phone and dialed Martin Reynolds' direct line at Nextech. It was time to share what I'd learned, and to ensure that Daniel Crawford faced the full consequences of his actions, both personal and professional. Martin Reynolds answered on the second ring, his typically confident voice edged with exhaustion. "Rebecca," he said when I identified myself, "I was just about to call you." "You sound tired," I observed. "I take it the investigation is keeping you busy?" "That's putting it mildly," Martin replied. "The past 24 hours have been enlightening, and not in a good way." "I've had a similar experience," I said, "which is why I'm calling. I've come across some information regarding Daniel that I think relates to your internal review." "I'm listening." I described the financial discrepancies I'd discovered, the double-billed expenses, the unauthorized account access attempts, and the suspicious transfers from our joint account. I deliberately omitted any mention of Sarah Donovan or the potentially forged wire transfer, wanting to see if Nextech had independently discovered that issue. Martin was silent for a long moment after I finished. "This aligns with what we're finding," he finally said, his voice grim. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll understand it's not personal. Were you aware of any of Daniel's activities before yesterday?" The question stung despite its necessity. "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "I discovered his affair with Elise Bennett yesterday afternoon. The financial discrepancies I found only after beginning to investigate this morning." "I had to ask," Martin said, apologetically. "The situation here is more serious than I initially thought. We've uncovered evidence suggesting Daniel may have been selling proprietary information, not just about Nextech, but potentially about Horizon Solutions as well." My stomach dropped. "What kind of information?" "Client lists, development timelines, pricing strategies." Martin paused. "And most concerning, details about your Seattle expansion plans that wouldn't have been public knowledge." The Seattle expansion was Horizon's most sensitive ongoing project, a major investment that would position us to capture the West Coast market ahead of our competitors. The plans had been closely guarded, shared only with my executive team and board. "How do you know this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising sense of violation. "We found communications between Daniel and a representative from Quantum Systems," Martin explained, naming one of Horizon's main competitors. "Email exchanges where he offered to provide inside intelligence in exchange for what he termed consulting fees." Quantum Systems. The company that had mysteriously outbid us for a prime Seattle office location just 3 months ago, forcing us to delay our expansion timeline and scramble for an alternative property. I need to see those emails, I said, my voice hardening. I've already instructed our legal team to prepare copies for you, Martin assured me. Rebecca, I can't express how sorry I am about this. Had I known what was happening under my own roof? You couldn't have known, I interrupted, surprising myself with the generosity of spirit. Daniel was exceptionally good at presenting himself as trustworthy. Nevertheless, Nextech bears some responsibility here. Your company may have suffered damages as a result of actions taken by one of our executives. I want you to know that we're committed to making this right, whatever that entails. His directness was refreshing. No deflection, no attempts to minimize. Corporate liability. I appreciate that, Martin. My legal team will need to review all the evidence before we can determine appropriate next steps. Of course, he hesitated. There's one more thing. We've discovered significant financial irregularities in our accounts, unauthorized transfers, questionable expense allocations, and at least one instance of apparent forgery involving my electronic signature. So Nextech had found the Cayman Islands transfer independently. What are your next steps? I asked. We've contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division, Martin replied, confirming the seriousness of the situation. This goes beyond internal. Disciplinary action now. Daniel may be facing criminal charges. Despite everything, the news landed like a physical blow. The man I'd married, shared a home with, planned a future with, was now potentially facing federal prosecution. The distance between the Daniel I thought I knew and the reality of who he was seemed to expand with each new revelation. I understand, I said finally. Please keep me informed as things develop. Likewise, Martin agreed. And Rebecca? Take care of yourself. This can't be easy on a personal level, regardless of the business implications. After ending the call, I sat motionless at my desk, trying to process the escalating scale of Daniel's betrayal. He hadn't just cheated on me or insulted me behind my back. He'd potentially committed crimes that could damage the company I'd built. From nothing. The achievement I was most proud of in my life. The intercom buzzed, Jasmine's voice cutting through my thoughts. Rebecca, your executive team is assembled in the conference room for the briefing you requested. Thank you, I replied, gathering my thoughts. I'll be right there. I'd planned to give my leadership team a straightforward, limited explanation of my divorce and its potential business implications. Now I needed to prepare them for something far more serious, a potential corporate espionage situation involving our most sensitive strategic plans. As I walked toward the conference room, my phone lit up with a series of incoming text messages from Daniel. Rebecca, please respond. This has gone too far. Martin's putting me on formal suspension pending a criminal investigation. This is insane. Whatever you think I've done, you're wrong. I can explain everything. Don't do this to us. To me. 5 years together has to count for something. His desperation was palpable, but it only strengthened my resolve. The us he referenced had been an illusion, a convenient fiction he'd maintained while systematically undermining me personally and professionally. I silenced my phone and pushed open the conference room door. My executive team, the 5 senior leaders who had helped me build Horizon Solutions into the success it had become, looked up expectantly. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to concern. Clearly, rumors had already begun circulating. Thank you all for making time for this unscheduled meeting, I began, taking my place at the head of the table. What I'm about to share is both personal and confidential, but it has potential implications for our company that you need to be aware of. For the next 20 minutes, I briefed them on the situation, my impending divorce from Daniel, his position at Nextech, and the emerging evidence suggesting he may have sold proprietary information about Horizon to our competitors. I was direct and factual, keeping my emotions firmly in check despite the personal nature of the betrayal. The FBI is now involved, I concluded. We'll be cooperating fully with their investigation, and our legal team is preparing to assess any damages Horizon may have suffered as a result of these actions. Alan Chen, my CTO and longest-serving executive, was the first to respond. The Seattle expansion plans. That explains how Quantum got ahead of us on the Westlake property. It seems likely, I agreed. We won't know the full extent until we see the communications Nextech has uncovered. What do you need from us? Asked Maria Santos, our CFO. Several things. First, a comprehensive security audit of all our systems and data. Alan, I'd like your team to lead that. Second, a review of any projects or initiatives Daniel might have had knowledge of through me. Maria, please work with each department to compile that information. Third, we need to prepare for potential public fallout if this becomes known more widely. Thomas Jackson, our head of PR, nodded grimly. I'll draft a statement and crisis management plan. We should be prepared for questions about our security, protocols, and how confidential information was accessible through a spouse. His comment stung, highlighting the uncomfortable truth. I had been the vulnerability in Horizon's security. Through my relationship with Daniel, I had inadvertently created a point of access that he had apparently exploited. You're right, I acknowledged. That's a valid concern, and one we'll need to address transparently. I take full responsibility for any exposure created through my personal relationship. No one is blaming you, Rebecca, Alan said firmly, others around the table nodding in agreement. Corporate espionage through personal relationships is unfortunately common. If anything, we should have had stronger compartmentalization protocols in place. Their support was heartening, but didn't erase the fact that my personal choices had potentially put the company at risk. It was a bitter pill to swallow for someone who had always prided herself on placing Horizon's interests first. Moving forward, we'll implement enhanced security measures and information access protocols, I decided. But our immediate focus needs to be on containing any ongoing damage and preparing for the investigation. What about Daniel himself? Thomas asked cautiously. Given your personal connection, how would you like us to handle any direct contact? If he reaches out to anyone here? It was a fair question. Despite our impending divorce, Daniel was still my husband legally, and until recently had been a semi-regular presence at company functions. Staff knew him, had interacted with him at holiday parties and team outings. Any contact from Daniel should be directed to our legal department immediately, I instructed. No information should be shared, no conversations engaged in, regardless of how innocent the inquiry might seem. The meeting continued for another half hour as we outlined immediate action items and assigned responsibilities. Throughout, I maintained my professional demeanor, even as internally I grappled with waves of anger, betrayal, and profound disappointment. As the team filed out, Maria lingered behind, waiting until we were alone before speaking. Rebecca, she began hesitantly. We've known each other for a long time. Before Horizon, before all of this. Are you okay? Really okay? The question, simple, direct, and asked with genuine concern, nearly cracked my carefully maintained composure. Maria and I had met in business school, had supported each other through the early struggles of our careers. She knew me in a way few others did. I started, then stopped, reconsidering the automatic reassurance I'd been about to offer. I'm processing, I admitted instead. Still discovering the extent of the deception. Still trying to reconcile the man I thought I married with the person he's turned out to be. Maria nodded, understanding in her eyes. It's a lot. Too much for anyone to handle alone, even you. I don't have much choice, I replied with a small, tight smile. It's my mess to clean up. Professionally, yes, she agreed. But personally, you're allowed to lean on people who care about you. You're allowed to not be okay. Her permission, to be human, to be hurt, was both a comfort and a danger. I couldn't afford to fall apart, not with so much at stake, so many people counting. on me to lead through this crisis. I'll be okay, I said finally. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. Right now, I need to focus on protecting Horizon and figuring out exactly what Daniel has done. Maria studied me for a moment, then nodded, accepting my boundaries. If you change your mind, if you need anything, personal or professional, I'm here. We all are. After she left, I returned to my office to find several voicemails waiting, 2 from Daniel, increasingly desperate in tone, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I played the latter first. Ms. Winters, this is Special Agent Marcus Rivera with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We're investigating certain activities involving your husband, Daniel Crawford. Please call me back at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting. The final confirmation, if I needed it, that this situation had moved far beyond a private marital dispute or even a corporate security breach. This was now a federal investigation, with all the scrutiny and potential public exposure that entailed. I was about to return the agent's call when my cell phone rang with Miranda's number. Daniel's been served with the divorce papers, she informed me without preamble. And he's already retained counsel, Thomas Harrington from Bedford and Associates. I recognized the name immediately. Thomas Harrington was one of Boston's most aggressive divorce attorneys, known for his scorched earth approach to high-asset cases. That was fast, I observed, a new knot of tension forming in my stomach. He must have had Harrington on standby. Possibly, Miranda agreed, or Harrington was willing to take him on immediately given the potential publicity value. Either way, this suggests Daniel's planning to fight rather than settle quietly, even with the post-nuptial agreement and mounting evidence of his misconduct? Especially because of those things, Miranda said grimly. He's cornered, Rebecca. Professionally disgraced, potentially facing criminal charges, and about to lose his married status and lifestyle. Men in that position often lash out, trying to salvage whatever they can. Money, reputation, or just the satisfaction of causing pain to the person they blame for their downfall. I'm not responsible for his choices, I said firmly. Of course not, Miranda agreed. But that won't stop him from trying to shift blame or extract concessions. Harrington has already requested an emergency hearing regarding continued access to the marital home and temporary spousal support. That's absurd, I protested. The house is explicitly designated as my separate property in the post-nup, which they'll likely challenge as unfair or signed under duress. It's a standard opening move. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Miranda's voice turned gentle but firm. Rebecca, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. Daniel's fighting for his survival now, at least as he perceives it. We need to prepare accordingly. As I hung up, I glanced at the framed photo still sitting on my desk, Daniel and me on our wedding day, both smiling broadly at the camera, his arm around my waist, my head tilted toward his shoulder. I'd been meaning to remove it since yesterday, but hadn't found the time amid the cascade of revelations and crises. Now, I carefully placed it face down in my desk drawer. That chapter of my life was closing, painfully and chaotically, but closing nonetheless. Ahead lay a gauntlet of legal battles, investigations, and potential public scrutiny, challenges I hadn't anticipated but would face head-on, just as I'd faced every other obstacle in my path. Daniel had called me a nobody to impress his mistress. In the coming weeks, he would discover exactly who he had underestimated, and what it meant to face Rebecca Winters as an adversary rather than a spouse. Meeting with FBI Special Agent Marcus Rivera was nothing like the dramatic television portrayals of federal investigations. There were no stark interrogation rooms or intimidating questioning techniques, just a methodical, professional conversation in a conference room at Horizon Solutions, with Miranda present as my legal counsel. I appreciate your willingness to meet on such short notice, Ms. Winters, Agent Rivera said as we settled around the table. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps mid-30s, with a precisely trimmed beard and attentive dark eyes that missed nothing. I understand this, is a difficult personal situation as well as a business concern. I'm committed to cooperating fully with your investigation, I replied, maintaining the composed professional demeanor that had become my armor over the past few days. Whatever information I can provide to clarify Daniel's activities, I'm happy to share. Let's start with your awareness of Mr. Crawford's financial activities, Rivera suggested, opening a slim laptop. When did you first notice any irregularities? For the next 2 hours, I walked through the timeline of discoveries, finding Daniel with Elise, uncovering the suspicious transfers from our joint account, learning about the double-billed expenses, and unauthorized access attempts. Miranda occasionally interjected to clarify points or ensure the scope of questioning remained appropriate, but mostly she observed, taking careful notes. You mentioned Mr. Crawford had access to sensitive information about Horizon Solutions, Rivera said, referencing earlier points in our conversation. Can you elaborate on how that access was granted and what specific information he might have obtained? This was the uncomfortable heart of the matter, the ways in which my personal relationship had potentially compromised my company's security. Daniel never had formal access to Horizon's systems or documents, I clarified. But as my husband, he was present in our home when I worked there. I took calls, reviewed documents, and sometimes discussed business challenges. I paused, the reality of my vulnerability still difficult to acknowledge. I trusted him completely. It never occurred to me that he might be gathering information to sell to competitors. That's a common situation in cases like this, Rivera said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. Corporate espionage through personal relationships is effective precisely because it exploits normal trust between partners. His words were similar to Alan's from our executive meeting, but they provided little comfort. Whatever the commonality of the situation, I still felt responsible for the breach. Do you have any direct knowledge of what specific information Mr. Crawford might have obtained or shared? Rivera continued. Only what Martin Reynolds shared with me regarding communications they discovered between Daniel and Quantum Systems, I replied. I haven't seen those communications myself yet. Rivera nodded, making a note. We'll be reviewing those as well. Now, regarding the financial aspects, the transfers from your joint account and the potentially forged wire transfer at Nextech, do you have any knowledge of where those funds were directed or how they were used? None whatsoever, I confirmed. Until yesterday, I had no reason to monitor transfers from our joint household account beyond ensuring there were sufficient funds for our regular expenses. And Mr. Crawford's lifestyle, did you notice any changes in his spending habits, travel patterns, or possessions over the past year? I considered the question carefully. He traveled more frequently for work, or what he claimed was work. There were more client dinners that ran late, but no obvious luxury purchases or significant lifestyle changes that seemed incompatible with his income. Mr. Crawford's salary at Nextech was approximately $170,000 annually, correct? Yes, plus potential bonuses based on performance. And your household expenses, particularly the Wellesley property, were primarily covered by your income. Yes, I confirmed. The house is in my name. I pay the mortgage, utilities, and property taxes. Daniel contributed to our joint household account for groceries, entertainment, and miscellaneous expenses. So there was a significant disparity between your finances, Rivera observed neutrally. Yes, but that was never an issue between us. Or so I thought. I couldn't keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Apparently, Daniel had a different perspective on our financial arrangement than he expressed to me. Rivera nodded, his expression revealing nothing. We're still tracing the movement of funds through several accounts. Preliminary findings suggest Mr. Crawford may have established offshore holdings under a shell company name. Does Wintercroft Ventures mean anything to you? I blinked, momentarily thrown by the name, a portmanteau of our surnames. No, I've never heard of it. It was registered in the Cayman Islands 6 months ago, Rivera explained. The registration papers list Daniel Wintercroft as the principal, but the contact information connects back to your husband. The calculated nature of it, using a variation of our combined names for his secret company, felt like another betrayal layered on top of the many I'd already discovered. Miranda leaned forward slightly. Agent Rivera, I understand you need to establish Ms. Winter's knowledge or lack thereof regarding these activities, but I want to be clear that my client is a potential victim here, not a subject of investigation. That's my current understanding as well, Rivera assured her. Ms. Winter's cooperation is helping us establish the timeline and nature of Mr. Crawford's activities. However, I should note that our investigation is still in its early stages. We go where the evidence leads us. The implied possibility that I might somehow be implicated in Daniel's schemes sent a chill through me despite my clear conscience. I have nothing to hide, I stated firmly. I've provided complete access to my financial records and will continue to cooperate fully. Rivera nodded, seemingly satisfied. Just a few more questions about your knowledge of Mr. Crawford's activities at Nextech. Were you aware of any unusual relationships or conflicts of interest he might have had with clients or competitors? None, I replied. Daniel rarely discussed the specifics of his work with me beyond general achievements or challenges. He compartmentalized his professional and personal life quite effectively. A trait that now appeared less like healthy work-life balance and more like deliberate concealment. The interview concluded shortly thereafter, with Rivera thanking me for my time and indicating he would likely need to speak with me again as the investigation progressed. What do you think? I asked Miranda once we were alone in the conference room. I think the FBI is taking this very seriously, she replied, reviewing her notes. The offshore account and shell company suggest this goes beyond opportunistic information. Selling or expense account padding. There's a level of premeditation and organization here that indicates sophisticated financial fraud. Could I be implicated somehow? The question had been nagging at me since Rivera's careful disclaimer. It's standard procedure for them to investigate all connected parties, Miranda assured me. But based on what we know now, there's no indication. You were involved in or aware of Daniel's activities. Stay transparent, keep cooperating, and continue providing all requested documentation promptly. I nodded, gathering my thoughts. What about the divorce proceedings? How does the criminal investigation impact that process? It complicates things, Miranda admitted. The court might be reluctant to make final property determinations while there's an ongoing federal investigation that could result in asset seizures or restitution orders. On the other hand, the evidence being uncovered strengthens our position regarding Daniel's duplicity and bad faith. And Harrington's emergency hearing request? We'll oppose it vigorously, Miranda stated confidently. The post-nup is clear regarding the house, and Daniel's own conduct, both the infidelity and the potential criminal activities, severely undermines any claim he might make for spousal support. As I returned to my office, I found Jasmine waiting, with a stack of messages and a concerned expression. Daniel's called 6 times in the past hour, she reported, and a reporter from the Boston Business Journal left 2 messages asking for comment on rumors that Daniel Crawford is under federal investigation for corporate espionage. So it had begun, the public dimension of this private nightmare. I shouldn't have been surprised. Boston's business community was too interconnected for something like an FBI investigation at a notable tech company to remain confidential for long. Tell Thomas to activate our media response protocol, I instructed, referring to our PR director. No direct comment on the investigation, but we'll confirm that I'm divorcing Daniel Crawford and that Horizon Solutions is cooperating with authorities regarding potential corporate security concerns. Emphasis on our commitment to protecting client data and proprietary information. And Daniel's calls? I hesitated. Thus far, I'd avoided direct communication with him, responding to his increasingly desperate messages with brief texts redirecting him to Miranda. But with the investigation escalating and media attention beginning, Perhaps it was time to establish clear boundaries directly. I'll call him back, I decided. Please hold all other calls for the next 15 minutes. Once alone in my office, I steeled myself and dialed Daniel's number. He answered immediately, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Rebecca, finally. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I interrupted, keeping my tone coolly professional. I understand you've retained Thomas Harrington for the divorce proceedings. All communications regarding that matter should go through Miranda Chen. Forget the divorce for a minute, he said urgently. The FBI came to my apartment this morning. They seized my laptop, my phone, everything. They're making it sound like I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. Aren't you? I asked quietly. The evidence suggests a pattern of deliberate fraud, Daniel. Corporate espionage, unauthorized financial transfers, possibly forgery. It's not what it looks like, he insisted. I can explain everything if you'll just meet with me. Somewhere private, just the two of us. That's not going to happen, I replied firmly. If you have explanations to offer, you should direct them to your attorney or to the FBI. Damn it, Rebecca. His composure cracked, frustration bleeding through. I'm your husband. 5 years together and you won't even give me a chance to explain? You forfeited that right when you betrayed me, not just personally with Elise, but professionally by selling information about my company. My voice remained steady, despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. You called me a nobody. To your mistress while plotting to take it all away from me. Those were your words, Daniel. Hard to misinterpret. He was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Softer, almost pleading. I was stupid. I said things I didn't mean to impress a woman who meant nothing to me. But I'm not a criminal, Becca. I didn't sell company secrets or forge documents. I'm being set up. By whom? I challenged. Martin Reynolds? Nextech's entire accounting department? The FBI? Everyone is conspiring against you simultaneously? You don't understand how corporate politics work, he argued, a hint of condescension creeping into his voice despite his precarious position. I made enemies at Nextech. People who were jealous of my success, my connection to you and Horizon. They're using this divorce situation to push me out and destroy my reputation. It was the same Daniel I'd always known, charming, persuasive, and utterly confident in his ability to reshape reality to suit his narrative. The only difference was that now I could see through the performance to the calculated manipulation beneath. The transfers from our joint account, I said, changing tack. The ones to the account I don't recognize. Where did that money go, Daniel? He hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicions. That was for a surprise I was planning for our anniversary. An investment opportunity that would have paid off significantly. An investment in Wintercroft Ventures, perhaps? I suggested, taking satisfaction in his sharp intake of breath. Yes, the FBI mentioned your shell company. Quite sentimental, using a combination of our names for your offshore account. Rebecca, please, he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I need your help. If you stand by me through this, tell the FBI and Nextech that you shared information with me knowingly as your husband. This all goes away. They can't prove anything without your testimony against me. The audacity of his request, that I perjure myself to protect him after everything he'd done, left me momentarily speechless. Daniel, I finally said, my voice deadly calm. Not only will I not lie for you, I will cooperate fully with every aspect of the investigation. I will provide every email, every text message, every financial record that might be relevant. I will testify under oath about every disparaging comment you made about me, every suspicious action you took, every lie you told. And I will do so not out of vengeance, but because it's the right thing to do. You'll regret this, he said, his tone shifting again, the desperate plea replaced by cold anger. If I go down, I won't go alone. I know things about Horizon, about your business practices, that wouldn't look good under scrutiny. Are you threatening me? I asked, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. "I'm stating facts," he replied. "We're still married, Rebecca. In the eyes of the law, we're one unit. My problems become your problems. My debts become your debts. Think about what this investigation will do to your precious company's reputation." I had considered it, at length, with my executive team, with Miranda, with Horizon's board. The potential fallout was significant but manageable, particularly given my transparent cooperation with authorities. "I've thought about it," I assured him. "I've weighed the risks of proceeding against the costs of enabling your behavior. There's no contest, Daniel. I'll rebuild Horizon's reputation if necessary. I won't compromise my integrity to protect a man who never deserved my trust in the first place." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threats and recriminations. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice eerily calm. "You'll hear from Harrington soon. I hope your post-nup is as airtight as you think it is. Goodbye, Rebecca." The call ended, leaving me with a strange mix of emotions: anger at his attempted manipulation, relief at having maintained my boundaries, and a lingering sadness for the death of whatever genuine connection we might once have shared. My phone buzzed almost immediately with a text from Miranda. "Judge denied Harrington's emergency motion. No hearing on house access or temporary support until a regularly scheduled court date next month. Small victory. Small victories would have to sustain me through what promised to be a lengthy and difficult process." As I turned back to my work, I felt fractionally lighter, more centered. The path ahead remained challenging, but with each decision, each boundary established, I was reclaiming pieces of myself from the wreckage of Daniel's deception. 3 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, FBI interviews, and concentrated efforts to protect Horizon Solutions from the fallout of Daniel's actions. The initial media speculation had given way to substantive reporting as more details of the investigation became public. The Boston Business Journal had run a feature with the uncomfortably direct headline, "Tech Exec's Husband Charged in Corporate Espionage Scheme." Daniel had been formally indicted on multiple federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, theft of trade secrets, and identity theft related to the forged wire transfer. He'd pleaded not guilty to all counts, maintaining his public stance that he was being framed by corporate rivals. Privately, through Harrington, he'd made increasingly desperate overtures about a potential settlement of our divorce, offers I'd consistently rejected on Miranda's advice. "He's looking for a lifeline," she'd explained after the latest proposal arrived. "His legal fees are mounting, his assets are frozen, and he's facing potential prison time. A favorable divorce settlement might give him funds to bolster his criminal defense." "Not happening," I'd replied, signing the latest counter-proposal that maintained the terms of our post-nuptial agreement. "He made his choices. He can live with the consequences." Today marked a significant milestone, our first court appearance, for the divorce proceedings. Despite Daniel's numerous delaying tactics, the judge had finally scheduled a hearing to address the disputed assets and establish temporary orders while the criminal case continued in federal court. I dressed with particular care, selecting a conservatively elegant navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation. The media interest in the case had not abated. If anything, it had intensified as details of Daniel's alleged crimes became public. Photographers would likely be waiting outside the courthouse. "You ready for this?" Miranda asked, meeting me in the lobby of her office building before we walked the short distance to the courthouse. "Daniel and Harrington will be pulling out all the stops today." "I'm ready," I confirmed, adjusting my portfolio of documents. After everything that's happened, facing Daniel in court seems almost anticlimactic. "Don't underestimate the emotional impact," Miranda cautioned. "Even when you're intellectually prepared, seeing an estranged spouse in a courtroom setting can be jarring." She wasn't wrong. Despite all my preparation, the first sight of Daniel being led into the courtroom by his attorney sent an unexpected jolt through me. He looked markedly different from the polished, confident man I'd married. His expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame, his once perfect haircut grown out and less precisely styled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the easy charm that had once seemed so natural was replaced by a tense watchfulness. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. I expected to see anger or resentment in his gaze, but instead caught something that looked almost like regret before he quickly looked away, leaning to whisper something to Harrington. The proceedings began with formal introductions and a summary of the case status by the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, who had, according to Miranda, a reputation for cutting through delays and obfuscation. Before we address the specific motions before the court, Judge Watkins began, I want to clarify the scope of today's hearing. While I'm aware of the concurrent federal criminal proceedings against Mr. Crawford, those matters will not be determinative in my decisions regarding the equitable division of marital assets. My concern is with the divorce action itself and the enforcement or challenge of the postnuptial agreement signed by both parties. Harrington rose smoothly. Your Honor, we contend that the postnuptial agreement should be set aside on grounds of fundamental unfairness and undue influence. Mr. Crawford signed the document without full understanding of its implications, under pressure from Ms. Winters, who wielded significantly greater financial power in the relationship. Miranda's response was immediate and firm. Your Honor, the agreement was properly executed with both parties represented by independent counsel. Mr. Crawford's attorney at the time certified that all terms were explained in detail, and Mr. Crawford confirmed his understanding in writing. There was no duress or undue influence. For the next hour, the attorneys argued back and forth about the validity of the postnuptial agreement. Harrington painted Daniel as a trusting husband who had signed away his rights under pressure from a domineering, wealthier wife. Miranda methodically dismantled this narrative with documented evidence of Daniel's legal representation during the signing and his subsequent acknowledgments of the agreement's terms. Throughout, I maintained a composed, attentive demeanor, occasionally providing notes to Miranda but otherwise remaining still and focused. Daniel, in contrast, seemed increasingly agitated, frequently whispering to Harrington and once audibly sighing when the judge questioned one of his attorney's assertions. Mr. Harrington, Judge Watkins finally interrupted during a particularly florid description of the supposed power imbalance in our marriage, I've reviewed the circumstances surrounding the execution of this agreement. Mr. Crawford was represented by counsel from Patterson and Williams, a reputable firm specializing in family law. His attorney provided a signed affidavit confirming that she explained all terms and implications. Mr. Crawford himself signed an acknowledgement of understanding. What specific evidence do you have of undue influence beyond your client's current, retrospective claim? Harrington hesitated, his confident facade momentarily cracking. Your Honor, the evidence is in the terms themselves. No reasonable person would willingly sign away rights to assets of this magnitude without some form of pressure or misunderstanding. That's not evidence, Counselor. That's speculation. The judge turned to Miranda. Ms. Chen, do you have any direct evidence regarding Mr. Crawford's state of mind or understanding at the time of signing? Miranda nodded, retrieving a document from her portfolio. Yes, Your Honor. We have emails from Mr. Crawford to his attorney at the time, discussing the agreement and expressing his clear understanding of its terms. She handed copies to the clerk. In particular, I would draw the court's attention to Mr. Crawford's statement that, and I quote, "The house and horizon remain Rebecca's separate property, which makes sense since they were hers before we met. And she's built them independently. I'm comfortable with this arrangement." Daniel's head snapped up, his expression a mix of surprise and dismay. Clearly, he hadn't expected these private communications to surface. The judge reviewed the emails carefully before looking up. Mr. Harrington, these communications seem to directly contradict your client's current position regarding his understanding of the agreement. Your Honor, context is important, Harrington attempted, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. Heard enough on this matter. Based on the evidence presented, I find that the post-nuptial agreement was properly executed with full disclosure and understanding by both parties. The agreement is valid and enforceable under Massachusetts law. She turned to address another aspect of the case. Regarding Mr. Crawford's request for temporary spousal support and continued access to the marital residence. 3 hours later, we emerged from the courtroom with a complete victory. Judge Watkins had upheld the post-nuptial agreement in its entirety, denied Daniel's claims for spousal support, and confirmed my exclusive right to the Wellesley property. Daniel would retain only his personal possessions, his separate bank accounts, currently frozen by the FBI, and his share of our joint household account, approximately $15,000 after accounting for the suspicious transfers he'd made. That went better than expected, Miranda commented as we walked back toward her office. Harrington usually puts up a more effective fight. He didn't have much to work with, I observed. The agreement was solid, and Daniel's credibility is severely compromised by the criminal charges. Speaking of which, Miranda said, checking her phone, I just received a message from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're offering Daniel a plea deal. I raised an eyebrow. What terms? Guilty plea to wire fraud and theft of trade secrets. The money laundering and identity theft charges would be dropped. Recommended sentence of 5 years, potentially reduced, with cooperation. Will he take it? Hard to say, Miranda replied. 5 years is significant, but much less than the potential 20+ he's facing if convicted on all counts at trial. It would largely depend on what cooperation entails. As we reached Miranda's building, a familiar figure was waiting near the entrance, Martin Reynolds, looking significantly more at ease than the last time we'd spoken. Rebecca, he greeted me, extending his hand. I heard today was your court date. I hope it went well? Very well, I confirmed, shaking his hand. The judge upheld our post-nuptial agreement completely, but I'm surprised to see you here. I wanted to deliver some news in person, he explained. The full forensic audit of Nextech Systems and Daniel's communications is complete. We've been able to definitively identify all the proprietary information that was compromised, including the specific Horizon data that was shared with Quantum Systems. This was significant. Concrete evidence of the damage Daniel had caused, which would support both the criminal case against him and any civil claims Horizon might pursue. Have you shared this with the FBI? I asked. Martin nodded. Full disclosure to the investigators, but there's more. We've also determined that the Westlake property situation in Seattle, which initially appeared to be linked to the leaked expansion plans, was actually unrelated. Quantum had been negotiating for that location for months before Daniel began providing them information. That's good news, I suppose, I said, processing this unexpected revelation. It means the damage to our Seattle expansion was coincidental, rather than directly caused by the information breach. Exactly. And we've located the $75,000 from the forged wire transfer. It was routed through 3 different shell companies before ending up in a brokerage account under the name Wintercroft Ventures. The FBI has already frozen those assets. After thanking Martin for the update and promising to stay in touch regarding the ongoing investigation, I parted ways with Miranda and headed to my car. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. The divorce proceedings had cleared the first major hurdle. The extent of Daniel's business betrayal was finally fully documented, and the financial trails were being unraveled by authorities. As I drove home to the Wellesley mansion, now unquestionably affirmed as my separate property, I found myself thinking not about Daniel or the court proceedings, but about the future. The past 3 months had been consumed by reactions to the crisis, by legal defenses and damage control. Perhaps now it was time to look forward again, to refocus on Horizon's growth and my own personal rebuilding. The house was quiet when I arrived, as it had been since Daniel's departure. I'd grown accustomed to the solitude, had even come to appreciate it after the chaos that had preceded it. Moving through the rooms that had once been ours, but were now definitively mine, I felt a growing sense of reclamation. In the study, the very room where I'd discovered Daniel with Elise that fateful day, my laptop sat open on the desk, a half-completed proposal for Horizon's restructured Seattle expansion visible on the screen. Next to it lay a brochure for a women's executive leadership conference I'd been invited to keynote, focused on building resilience through professional crises. My phone rang as I was reviewing the speaking invitation. The caller ID showed unknown, but something prompted me to answer rather than sending it to voicemail as I typically did with unidentified callers. Rebecca Winters. Ms. Winters, this is Special Agent Rivera. The FBI investigator's voice was as measured as ever. I wanted to inform you personally that Daniel Crawford has accepted the plea agreement offered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. I sat down at my desk, surprised by the quick development. I just heard about the offer a few hours ago. His attorney contacted us immediately after the divorce hearing, Rivera explained. Apparently, today's court ruling was the deciding factor. With the post-nuptial agreement upheld and no access to the marital assets, Mr. Crawford's options for mounting an effective criminal defense were significantly limited. I see, I said, absorbing this information. What does this mean for the case moving forward? Mr. Crawford will formally plead guilty next week to the reduced charges. As part of the agreement, he's providing complete information about his financial activities, including all accounts and transactions related to the misappropriated funds and payments received for confidential information. And Horizon Solutions, will we recover damages for the information breach? That would typically be handled through civil proceedings, Rivera replied. But the plea agreement includes provisions for restitution to affected parties, which would include both Nextech and Horizon Solutions. The exact amounts will be determined at the sentencing hearing. After thanking Rivera for the update and ending the call, I sat motionless at my desk, staring out at the meticulously landscaped gardens visible through the study windows. The same gardens I'd gazed at that first night after discovering Daniel's betrayal, when the future had seemed so uncertain and threatening. Now, just 3 months later, the landscape had transformed completely. Daniel had pleaded guilty and would serve prison time for his crimes. The divorce was proceeding in my favor, with my separate assets protected. Horizon Solutions had weathered the crisis and was moving forward with renewed security protocols and strategic plans. My phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel, the first direct communication I'd received from him since our confrontational call months ago. I took the deal. I know it doesn't change anything between us, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly. I'm sorry, Rebecca, for everything. It wasn't supposed to end this way. I stared at the message, conflicted about whether to respond. There was nothing left to say, really. No explanations that would suffice, no apologies that could repair the damage done. Yet something in his acknowledgement of responsibility, however belated, deserved recognition. After several minutes of consideration, I typed a brief reply. Thank you for letting me know. I hope you find a way to rebuild after this, Daniel. It wasn't forgiveness. That might never come completely. But it was an acknowledgement of our shared humanity, despite everything that had happened. He had called me a nobody in a moment of arrogance and deception. I would not diminish myself by responding with equal cruelty now that the tables had turned. Setting my phone aside, I returned to the leadership conference materials on my desk. The organizers had asked me to speak about resilience in the face of personal and professional crises, a topic I now had intimate, hard-won expertise in. My tentative title, Rebuilding from Betrayal. When personal crisis meets professional challenge, stared back at me from the page. Perhaps this was the silver lining in the dark cloud of the past months. The ability to transform a painful experience into wisdom that might help others facing similar challenges. The mansion Daniel had coveted, the company he had attempted to exploit, the life he had tried to claim credit for, all of these were firmly mine, stronger for having weathered the storm of his betrayal. As night fell over the Wellesley estate, I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, reclaiming each space with my solitary presence. In the master bedroom, I opened the walk-in closet that had once housed Daniel's expensive suits alongside my own clothing. Now the space was entirely mine, reorganized and simplified in the weeks following his departure. On an impulse, I reached for the one item of his I had kept, a small wooden box containing the first business card I'd ever given him, preserved as a memento of our meeting. I'd found it in his nightstand when packing his things and had set it aside, touched by the sentiment it represented. Opening it now, I saw that the card was indeed there, but beneath it lay something I hadn't noticed before, a handwritten note. In Daniel's distinctive script, dated just 2 weeks after we'd met, Rebecca Winters, CEO. The perfect target, successful, wealthy, no family connections. This could be the opportunity I've been waiting for. I stared at the note, a final confirmation of what I'd gradually come to accept over the past months. Our entire relationship had been calculated from the very beginning. A long con orchestrated by a man who had seen me not as a partner to build a life with, but as a target to exploit. The revelation should have devastated me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of closure. The last lingering question, whether any part of our relationship had been genuine, was finally answered definitively. I returned the box to the closet shelf, no longer a memento, but evidence of a painful lesson learned. Then I moved to the window overlooking the property that was indisputably mine, the home I had earned through years of hard work and strategic vision, the tangible manifestation of a success story Daniel had tried to co-opt, but could never truly claim. He had called me a nobody to impress his mistress, unaware that his lawyer would eventually expose the truth about who really owned the mansion we had shared. But the revelation of property ownership was merely a surface-level truth. The deeper reality, that I owned not just a house but my identity, my accomplishments, and my future, was the true victory I carried forward from the wreckage of our marriage. Standing alone in the house that symbolized everything I had built and everything Daniel had coveted, I finally felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at Horizon Solutions, new hearings and proceedings in the ongoing legal aftermath, new opportunities to rebuild and strengthen what had been temporarily shaken. But tonight, in the quiet solitude of a home that was fully mine, I allowed myself to acknowledge a simple, powerful truth. I wasn't just somebody. I was Rebecca Winters, a woman who had built an empire with her own hands, survived betrayal with her dignity intact, and emerged stronger for. Having faced the storm, the mansion wasn't just mine on paper. It was mine in the deepest sense possible, earned through my labor, protected by my foresight, and now reclaimed through my resilience. No one could ever take that away from me again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.